to say, and we'll start the recording now. So Wayne, it's all yours.
All right, so I think I know most of you, and that's not to your betterment, I'm sure. But thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I've just come from, I work with the Gold Coast Titans NRL team. I've just come from doing some things with them this morning, which is great. What I've found, certainly with coach development over the years, is that we've gone from courses, conferences, and clinics, all the C's, to very much in context. And I've been fortunate that the head coach that I work with there, I have a great trust relationship with, and he allows me just to walk around on the field with the coaches. And it's a wonderful thing if you've got somebody working with you in an educational perspective, someone that you trust and you have belief and faith in. That's a great way to learn. So I find that I don't have to do a lot of sit-down meetings with these guys. What we do is we're out on the field while they're in the context of working with players, and if we have a 2-minute break, if we have an opportunity, then that's the greatest possible moment, just to have a little bit of an influence on maybe the way they communicate, on maybe the way they're giving feedback, on their connection with players. And it's also a great time to do some work around leadership and commitment and dedication with the player group. And increasingly what I see, guys, certainly in football codes that I work with, is that we've gone from doing education, coach development, and training from that perspective of courses and so on to actually being out and working with coaches in context. And it's a great moment. And I also notice during the pre-recording discussion, someone raised the name of Bill Sweetenham. I was lucky I saw him on Tuesday. I went and had an hour with him and talked everything from family to politics to solving world poverty and even the Russian-Ukraine situation, which is common for Bill. And but look, he's had some issues with health. So those of you that care a lot about Bill, and there is a lot of us that are in that boat, that he's had some ongoing issues again with his leg. And it'll be great maybe to give him a call or send him an email, send him a text and check in on him, make sure he's going fine. He looked great the other day. He was big and angry as usual, and it was a fantastic hour. So I value every time I get to speak with him now, and it gets less and less as we both get a little bit older and a little bit more distant with the sort of work we do. But it's always great to see him. But those of you who know him well, and I know from some of the faces that you're mates of Bill's from a long time, please take an opportunity to send him a note and check in on the old fella. He is still coaching, and he's still got that absolute fire in his heart that he's always had. So today I thought I'd talk about some of the things I see in great coaches, and I'm very fortunate that at the moment around 10% of the work I do is in swimming. The majority of time that I spend with coaches, it's in other sports, and mostly at the moment team sports. So professional netball, I did a bit of work with water polo last year, and of course, I just mentioned doing some work with NRL. And I'll share very honestly what I've seen and how I've seen coaches be successful, some of the things that they do that lead them to be consistently successful. And I'll give you some ideas, throw some suggestions at you about where I think that may fit in with swimming. And particularly the way that I'm seeing this collaborative approach to coaching working in so many other sports. I think there's some great opportunities there for coaches to look at maybe the way we do things a little bit differently and have a huge impact in what is a challenging environment. Now, what it is very obvious, and I'm sure to all of you, is that there's been a pandemic, and we often talk about life in terms of BC, before COVID. And a lot of the sessions I get to do, I did one with Singapore last week. I've got another session with Hong Kong coming up on Monday, I think. A lot of the sessions are around how do we rebuild and get back to where we were. The reality was, coaches, that our sport, the sport that I love the most, was already in great trouble before the last great pandemic. The numbers of kids in competitive swimming around the world was falling before COVID. I think we've got to be a bit cautious if we hear people say, well, you know, before COVID, everything was great, and now we're striving to get back to where we were, and COVID had caused all the difficulties. And the reason why kids are not re-engaging with the sport to the pre-COVID levels is because of the pandemic. It's not really accurate. If you look at where numbers of kids who are actively involved in competitive swimming in England, in Australia, in Canada, in the US, I can't speak for New Zealand, I don't know the data there, but the consistent pattern around the world that kids in competitive swimming were increasingly walking away at those three critical dropout points: entry to high school, mid-high school where they have to get serious and make some hard decisions about their life, and exit from high school, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, where there isn't what I would call a highly successful InterVarsity program for them to go into when they leave high school. The same pattern, however, coaches, we're seeing in sports right around the world. Those of you who love rugby, and I'm sure that's most of you, will know from Rugby New Zealand's own data that the number of kids who are playing competitive rugby before COVID, again, this is all before COVID, the number of kids who are playing junior club rugby around New Zealand had fallen by around about 10% over a couple of years. And COVID has merely accelerated some of those trends. The number of kids who play rugby league, AFL in Australia had similarly been falling before COVID. So if you're looking at programs and thinking, well, you know, the real issue is recovery from COVID, and of course that's important, the sport was already struggling. And the data that I've seen, the data that I'm familiar with from Sport England, Sport Canada, certainly Sport Australia, is that the easy thing to think is, well, what we need now is better facilities, more equipment, more money, and we'll turn this around and kids will come running back. I don't think that's the case necessarily. There's a lot of kids around Australia, New Zealand, around the west of the world, sitting on their lounges, playing Xbox, focused on other things. I don't know having a new set of starting blocks is the thing that's going to get them to come back to your program. I don't think that building a new grandstand is what's going to get those kids who haven't been swimming through COVID. I don't know that's the thing that's going to inspire and fire their heart to come back to competitive sport of any kind. My passionate belief is that they'll come back because of relationships, because of the quality of the connections, because of the coach and the coaching program that's available. I'm a passionate believer that it's coaches and coaching that will be more significant in turning around the post-COVID fall-off experience that we've all had, more important than anything else. Kids are not going to be sitting at home, coaches, and go to mum and dad and say, please, please take me back to swimming. We've got a new set of blocks or new lane ropes or new backstroke flags or even a new strength training facility. They don't get excited by those things. And those of you that have been coaching a long time, and there's several of you on the call, know that kids will come back because they're excited by the sport, because they're in love with the sport, because the relationship that they have with the sport, which is usually the relationship they have with their coach, because coaches are the sport. We deliver the experience of sport. Quite often coaches are the sport to the athletes. They'll come back because of you, and they'll come back because of the quality of your coaching and the strength and the quality of the relationships that you have with them. So that's why today's topic is what it is what can coaches do? What can we as coaches do to really re-engage and excite and fire those hearts and minds that are all sitting at home playing PS4 or maybe looking for other options? So let's get into it. And I usually hate, can someone, Brandon, can you give me participant screen sharing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I usually hate PowerPoint, but this doesn't give us a lot of options, although you'll notice I'm standing today. At least it makes it feel like we're putting on a bit of a show.
Hold on. Might have to get Henrietta to co-host me and make it you, Wayne.
That's
So
all right.
give us a second.
We can sing in the meantime.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, recently had the chance to do a presentation with a podcast with Brett Hawke. And if you haven't seen that yet, I think Hawkey's doing a fantastic job. His ratings are very high and he's got a really good feel and a lot of respect, I think, and credibility because he's a quality coach, a great deal of experience. He was a pretty good sprint athlete himself and has had success, obviously, at the the world level. I've been watching a lot of his stuff recently. There's some fantastic stuff there.
All right, Wayne, you're co-host now, so I think you should be able to have a go.
I think you guys have done this before. Can I just confirm that there's a picture of a great Australian swimmer on the screen at the moment?
Yep, a great Australian one, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I've taught him everything we know here, as you know. Right, so that should do it. All right. So what I hope I'll be able to share with you and you can gain in the next hour is an understanding of some of the main reasons that I think great coaches are great. Some specific examples of coaches who live those principles, and then some practical ways I think that all of us can apply what I've learned from different coaches over the years. I'll start with a quick Eddie Jones story. I've known Eddie Jones, who coached rugby in Australia, rugby in Japan, rugby in South Africa when they won the World Cup, and now he coaches in England. And Eddie's always a stimulating guy to talk to. He's fascinating. One of the things that he was sharing with me when I saw him in England in 2019 was how they use virtual reality with players resuming from injury. So a player may not be able to run or put a lot of load on their legs, but they've got virtual reality helmets and they can go on one of their indoor fields and they can walk through their plays. So the player is learning, they're remembering, they've got virtual reality. I said, how did you come up with that, Eddie? And he said, a really crazy rugby fan from the Royal Navy approached them and shared some of their training simulation technology specific for rugby. But he's always trying to learn, and he's an incredibly a powerful speaker. I think he does a lot of things well. The thing that stood out to me in 2019 was we were having lunch, and normally with Eddie, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Even if you're sitting there having a meal with him, Eddie will have a notebook and he'll be taking notes of the discussion. And this time, 2019, about May, so about 5 months before the World Cup, Eddie had two notebooks. And I said to him, obviously at one stage, I said, why have you got two notebooks, Ed? And he said, well, one notebook, this is the 2019 World Cup rugby notebook. That's for where we are now. These are all our key plays, our key principles, our values, what we know and believe will be the cornerstone of our success for this World Cup. This book is full of ideas and suggestions and thoughts for the next World Cup. And he said, because we've got a commitment to do things this way, but I know I'll be a coach in the future after the World Cup, whether it's here or maybe somewhere else, who knows? But he said, I'll be a high-level coach. I've got a lot of ideas. I've had a lot of thoughts. A lot of things have come to mind, but it's too late to implement them now. But I know I can put them in place and build them over the next 4.5 years. And to me, that's the essence of what a great coach is all about, is their passion for learning, their passion for improvement, their dedication to be better today than they were yesterday. In other words, they apply the same principles and standards to their own improvement as they do with their athletes. So let's get into it. These are the 8 things. I did a post on LinkedIn yesterday, which is where I put most of my stuff these days. And most of you on this call, I would think all of you, knowing the faces and names, all of you could have done this list, more or less. Some of you may have put more emphasis on communication, others more on talent, some on sports science, some on culture and development. We know these things. The issue around coaching is doing. Coaching is putting things into act. What I'm noticing at the moment, particularly through COVID, and as my bank account currently reflects, there's a lot of people online who talk about that they've got all the solutions. They'll write about things that they know to be true, but coaches act. It's that acting and that interaction that we have that makes the difference. So anyway, these are the 8. Connect, engage, and inspire their athletes. CEI, so connect with the hearts and minds of athletes, engage them. My definition of an engaged athlete is one who gives you more than could reasonably be expected. The kid that you put 400 on the board does 500. You ask them to do 6, they do 8. You ask them to be there at 6 a.m., they're there at 5:30 helping to set up. An engaged athlete is an athlete who gives you more than could reasonably be expected, and great coaches inspire their athletes. Great coaches build and grow quality relationships with their athletes. Great athletes, great coaches use science, but don't allow the science to take over. So it's integrated. They think scientifically. They're more than happy to apply scientific principles and methods, but they don't allow it to take over. Coach the person before the performance, holistic coaching, humanistic coaching. They know that it's a spaces between the lines. And when we get to that section in about 10 or 15 minutes, I'll spend a lot of time on that with some swimming specific examples. They know that everyone is different, especially when it comes to technique, and a little lesson there from Gennady, which I'm sure most of you have heard before, but I always believe it's repeating. Know that to create and innovate is great. That's where greatness really comes from. Nobody gets to the top without being a little bit different. I think it's difference that leads to greatness. If you're doing the same thing the same way as everybody else, chances are of getting a breakthrough, unless you just happen to fall into having an incredibly talented athlete walk in, that without creativity and innovation and being prepared to dare to be different, to do things that no one else is doing, then it's unlikely that you can gain that greatness edge that maybe you're seeking. And the Eddie Jones story that I started with, never stop learning, and I've got another one coming up. All right, here we go. So connect, engage, and inspire their athletes. What I'm seeing, colleagues, and even from this morning, what I'm seeing working with coaches in different sports, is we're very much in an era where being able to connect and understand the hearts and minds of the athletes is critically important. What I mean by that is the way that we've done this for so long is to say, this is my program, this is my pool, I am an international level coach. You will therefore do things the way that I want to achieve my goals. And if you want to be an international swimmer, you'll do 10 a week because that's what I believe. What I'm seeing increasingly is that our standards haven't changed. It's always going to be a tough sport. It's always going to be challenging, demanding. There is no easy way. Let's make that upfront and clear. However, the way we get to that place is very different to maybe to where it was 10 years ago. What we're seeing, and certainly looking at the report that just came out through Swimming Australia, I encourage you to read that. And definitely I wrote the strategy with a team. We wrote the strategy for the 2018 to 2028 national coaching strategy for SAL as well. What I'm seeing very more is it's now saying to an athlete, what do you want from the experience? It comes from the Stephen Covey book, 10 Habits, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or 15 Habits of Highly Brilliant People, whatever it is. But that Covey book originally said, chapter 1 was chapter 1 without accident. It said, seek to understand before trying to be understood. Understand before being understood. What we see with coaches more and more is they're spending more time understanding the athletes that they're working with, understanding their motivation. Now, coaches, one of the biggest myths in sport is that you can motivate people to do things they don't want to do. I don't believe that's coaching. We don't motivate. What we do is we connect, we inspire, we listen, we understand the athlete and what their motivation is, because motivation is like a little flicker, like a little flame burning in their chest. And through our coaching, through creating the right environment, through giving them the opportunity, that flame can burst forward and become something unbelievably powerful and drive them to achieve success that even maybe they didn't think was possible. And I think the big shift that I see in coaching is it's gone from coaches motivating and telling and yelling and trying to be the energy force that's taking the team to remarkable things, to saying, how do I understand these athletes? What is their motivation? How do I connect with that? How do I understand them? How do I get them to make decisions that are going to help them be better athletes? And I'll talk about that a lot more later on. One of the stories that I do love to tell, and it is a Sweetenham story, that Sweetenham had a reputation of being very hard-nosed, being very difficult and demanding. At the end of his boot, sometimes myself, I can relate to that. But Bill would use words like uncompromising, relentless commitment to excellence, hard work. All those things were the cornerstone of who Bill was for so long, partially due to the man that he is, and also due to his upbringing in regional Queensland, out in a mining town called Mount Isa. And some of Bill's sets, legendary, 1500s and all those things, and certainly that was where Bill was. But I spent some time on deck with Bill only a year or two back, and he was working with an international team, and he was working with a distance girl. So it's just, everything's just prime for, that's right Bill territory, a committed distance athlete seeking his expertise to become the best in the world. You could just feel the energy and passion with Bill. And so she did a set towards the end of workout, which was 1200s on about 140, 145 turnaround, long course push. And she was holding 63, 64. So a quality female distance athlete. At the end of the 12, she comes in, and I'm waiting for the fire and the brimstone. I'm waiting for the smoke to come out of his ears. And I'm waiting for that moment where Bill becomes what I've seen of Bill in the past at different times, that passionate, driven, motivating energy force that he was. Instead, I saw Bill go over and ask the athlete, so if you had to rate that session out of 10, what would you rate it? She said, about a 7, coach. And he said, what do you think you could do to make that an 8 or a 9? And she said, well, I could do maybe 2 or 3 more reps, coach, a little bit faster, a little bit quicker turnaround rate, but there's a little bit more there. And he said, that's a great idea. And off she went. That's what I'm talking about, coaches. In the end, she did exactly what Bill probably wanted her to do. But because of the way he connected with her, because of the understanding and relationship he had with the athlete, and knowing how to coach her at that moment, the athlete took the responsibility and the ownership for their own destiny. They grabbed their own training and practice and said, I can make this remarkable. Why? Not because of what he told me to do, because I choose to be remarkable. It's my responsibility. I own this moment, and I'll own this workout. And Bill repeated that process 2 or 3 more times, and the athlete was in there after a fairly tough session anyway, for about another 40 minutes, challenging herself, taking ownership and responsibility for that level of challenge. Guys, that's the art of coaching. And if a guy like Bill can make that transition from driving and motivating and using his significant force and influence, then there's a great lesson, I think, for everybody about how do we get athletes to expect and demand more of themselves, take ownership and responsibility. Now, quite often when I do these types of sessions, I say, oh, it's about being soft, or it's got nothing to do with that. In fact, if an athlete is engaged and they've accepted responsibility for their destiny, the sessions become incredibly demanding and challenging, but it's being owned and driven by them. And that's really the magic of great coaching. Secondly, great coaches build and grow quality relationships with their athletes. One of the reasons that I think that our dropout rate is very clearly, if you look at the data, I'm sure New Zealand's the same, that the 3 key dropout rates: entry to high school. Why? Kids got to travel, different classmates, mum and dad maybe have to travel differently, go from a bus to a train or a car to riding a bike, different teachers, different focus, school sport, all those things happen. Very difficult to remain focused on doing something that requires a lot of time and energy. Mid-high school, 14, 15, what an old coaching mate of mine used to say, the fumes, car fumes and perfumes, they're growing up, they want to experience different things. School's getting more challenging and demanding, they're thinking about careers, and then exit from high school. They're the 3 critical moments, typically in swimming and athletics and rowing and most of the Olympic sports, where we lose kids. I think one of the reasons is that we fail to adapt our relationship with the athlete over that period of time. Those of you with kids and working with age groupers as well will know that you can't talk to a 16-year-old the way you talk to a 13-year-old. They're different human beings. One's talking about Pokemon, one's talking about getting a driver's license. Very, very different people doing the same things. And the feedback that we get, and certainly a lot of the data that I've seen about why kids drop out from sport, a lot of them will go through what I call relationship rationalization. They're 15, 16, and they're going, what relationships do I need? What relationships do I value? What relationships are relevant to me? So I'll give you an example. They go, school, I have to have that relationship because I'm 15 or 16. Got to keep that one. Girlfriend, boyfriend, I care about them. They care about me. I'll keep that relationship. Play junior hockey 2 nights a week. I love the blokes. We're running around having a good time. Games are Saturday afternoon. Gives me a chance to do my homework and other stuff. Fantastic. I enjoy it. They get the swimming and they go 10 times a week, 2 hours morning and night, have to give up all weekends, not getting a lot of feedback. Relationship with the coach is still them standing at the end of the pool yelling times, splits and stroke rates. Doesn't really know anything about me, doesn't know my study, has taken no interest in me as a person. Maybe I don't need that relationship. That to me is one of the issues. It's easy to blame the sport and say, oh, the kid's not tough enough. The kid doesn't want to work. Meets are boring. All those things may or may not be true. I don't know. But I think you get to that moment at 15 or 16 and you go, what relationships are important to me? What are relevant to me? What are giving me real satisfaction? What's important to me? And I go, what relationships can I do without? And at that moment, they're looking at you thinking, man, this coach, I love this coach. They care about me. They really have interest. I had a great honor a few years ago and doing a little bit of time with Eddie Reese, and who I still think's the best coach that I've had anything to do with. And Eddie gave me the opportunity to speak to some of his athletes. And all the athletes that I spoke to, when I said, what is it about Eddie? And because it's a learning opportunity for me as well. What is it about Eddie that makes him special? Words like, he cares about me. I love the bloke. I wish he was my dad. He's like my grandfather. He knows it was all relationship stuff. And when I've had discussions with players that have been coached by great rugby coaches, rugby league coaches, you ask them the same type of question. They'll say, why are you here? Mate, the coach cares about me. Coach wants me to get better. The coach is interested in me. I think we underestimate the power of that relationship that we build. I think we certainly underestimate the impact that when they go through that relationship rationalization process, that at that moment, I don't believe for a minute it's about hard work. I think they go, this relationship is not giving me anything that I really want. Therefore, with all the things that I'm doing at the moment, I don't need this relationship. And they move on. Great coaches know that those relationships are the cornerstone of everything that they do. Right, use science, but don't allow science to take over. I spent a bit of time leading Swimming Australia's sports science, sports med and research program. I did the same job for Rugby Australia, probably explains a lot, and did the same job for triathlon. And I've had some advisory jobs in different sports science, sports med roles. This is Australian water polo team, the girls that I worked with last year leading into Tokyo. That's my little bald patch in front of the camera, and was freezing cold. We're in the mountains up behind Noosa, and this was a First Nations, an Indigenous Australian experience. And the girls got to dance. We got to walk through the bush and try native foods. We understood the significance and the importance of understanding our complete heritage as Australians across their own unique heritage as individuals, their own family heritage, and of course, the importance and the role of Indigenous Australians and First Nations people in us becoming a nation. Now, I had a great conversation with, I'm just trying to see where he is. He's in there with our physiologist. And the whole time we were sitting there trying to get a feel for the place and get an understanding of the spirit of what was there, and just to enjoy this moment. The whole time he was talking about recovery. He was talking about testing tomorrow morning, asking me questions about physiological things that we were working on at the time. And I thought he just doesn't get it, that science is important, of course. Knowing when, how, and why to apply sports science is critically important in elite swimming. But guys, don't allow it to take over. Don't allow it to become the only thing. The great Don Talbot, who's no longer with us, Don always used to say, as a swimming coach, I'm a tradesman. I have many, many tools, and sports science is but one of the tools I use. Also, as a tradesman, in my bag are communication, empathy, connection, listening, technique, skills, pacing strategies. I have many, many tools. Sports science is but one of them. So it's important, and I see coaches using sports science. One of the things of interest, hopefully for you, that we do a lot of work with drones now. We were using drones in definitely with the water polo guys. We use it in NRL all the time, but we use it for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes if it's a football team, we're using drones to have a look at channels, to look at defensive lines moving up and back, to looking where we're making space. Sometimes we look at where the coaches are. So we think about coaching as a team. I'm sure most of you have got assistant coaches and you do team coaching. So one of the things we always do with our coaches is we talk to them about where they are, where they're positioned, how they're working with players, maybe who's running the drill. Coaches being with the defenders, coaches being with the attackers, floating coaches who do one-on-one on specific skills, which is critically important in a team sport. Every significant moment in a team sport is one-on-one. It's an individual environment, often wrapped up in a team program. So the sports science is there. We do urine-specific gravity tests, particularly in the heat that we experience here. At the moment, we're doing rat tests every morning when we go in, and we sit there for 15 minutes. Great time to connect with players and chat. And we do, if you're there all day, they do a second rat test. A rat. Otherwise, it's rat test. That, but we're doing rats every day to make sure the environment is as safe as we can get it, and we've got protocols around that. So we're surrounded by science, but the strength of the programs that I see isn't the science. It's the relationship, it's the coaching, it's the connection, it's the listening, it's knowing when to have a coffee with players, it's knowing when to back off. Little thing of interest maybe for you, this one of the things we've been talking about this week is coaching rhythm. And when you're working with a team sport week to week, the critical coaching is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. That's when the coaches have got to be on fire and do their best coaching. And then we progressively back off over the week to allow the players to then accept responsibility and ownership for the game that they have to play on the weekend. If you don't do that, by the time they're out on the field, they're looking around saying, please help us, what do we do next? And you can't have that in a high-speed sport with a lot of decision-making. So we make a conscious decision to progressively back off our coaching over the week, and it goes from being just full-on, lots of learning, lots of impact, to over the week, empowering the players to take ownership over their game that they're going to have to implement on the weekend. So science important, but it's not the only thing. For Coach the Person Before the Performance, some of you may have seen that. That's the Australian area at the Tokyo Olympics, and that barista was the most popular person in the team, as they usually are. It's very easy when someone walks into a program to say, oh, that looks like a freestyler. Oh, wow, looks like a butterfly. They swim 2 laps and you go, wow, there's my medley swimmer that I always wanted. But kids are not backstrokers and they're not freestylers. They're kids who are amazing, kids who do school, kids that play music, kids who are part of a family who just choose to do backstroke, and maybe they do it a little bit better than some of the other strokes at this moment in time. One of the big things that you guys will see it in sport, it's prolific now, certainly here, is the increased focus on athlete welfare, mental health, and well-being. The feedback from retiring athletes is very strong. The feedback says that when they retired, when they stopped being a backstroker, when they're no longer a butterfly, when they're no longer an elite swimmer, so many of them go through a crisis of identity. So many of them go through an issue where they're struggling to figure out who they are. The story I like to tell on this was Shane Gould, Dr. Shane now. He's done some great work in swimming. But Shane Gould, 1972, 3 gold, a silver and a bronze at the 72 Olympics, the same Olympics where Spitz performed with such distinction. And Shane tells a story that I think every swimming coach in the world should think about and listen to. Shane tells a story where she says, when I was 16, I was introduced to the Queen, to the Prime Minister, known through the press and through the world as Shane Gould, the swimmer. I decided to retire. I looked in the mirror and went, my God, I'm Shane Gould, the nothing. And I was depressed for the next 20 years. That's a very short version of a very long and emotionally draining presentation by Shane. And if you get to hear it, I recommend you look at it and you play it for every parent that you've got in the program. It's critically important, and I see it again in great coaches, is the relationship is not with the athlete, it's with the person. The coaching of the person before the performance is so important, because from that comes understanding and relationships and that real sense of, I care about you. I'm interested in you as a human being before I'm interested in how fast you might swim. And that's Shane Gould's story. I heard that 20 years ago, and I heard it again not that long ago, and it still resonates very strongly. It's not about what they do, it's all about who they are. This is the one that probably be of the most interest to you. I've got a lot of stuff I've just put on. I talked to Brett Hawke about this the other week. It was a great discussion. I love Hawkey. And this is quite interesting. So that was a scribble of, believe it or not, a whole bunch of podcasts that I was going to do on the day. And each one of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, each one of those represents about a 20-minute podcast. It's not what you're seeing on the screen. It's the things that are not written. And a lot of the things are just experiential, or next to that, I've got a page of dot points that I look at when I'm recording a podcast. It's the spaces between the lines that matter. And hopefully this next little bit will be the thing that makes the biggest impact on you and makes you consider what you're doing. I'm sure this is fairly common to most of you. One of the most important concepts that I talk about anywhere is this. It's called content intent. Every time you write a training program, which is done with the science of swimming, volume, intensity, frequency, drills, kick, pull, relay, sprint, all those training methodologies, every time you write a workout, the science of sport, we call it the content. So what's actually written on the board, that's your content of your workout. But every time we do a workout, coaches, every time we write content, we do so with the underlying assumption that the athletes will do the content with the intent with which it was written. And, you know, over the years, guys, I've seen coaches who do huge volumes. I've generally been in programs where I've seen coaches doing 90 to 100 Ks a week. I remember traveling with Gennady Turetsky before the 96 Olympics and seeing back-to-back 90-kilometer weeks, in spite of what you may or may not think about Gennady's training philosophy. I've seen others that are doing as little as 25 Ks a week and still producing world-class athletes, but they're doing huge amounts of training out of the pool with running and cycling and CrossFit and a whole range of other things. Which one's right? I don't know. Some are committed to heavy lifting. When I visited Eddie in Austin, in University of Texas, Austin, male, senior, elite swimmers with great training backgrounds. He's a big advocate of Olympic lifting and heavy lift. I've seen others who say, no, don't like heavy lifting. I think it's a waste of time. There's an injury risk, and they don't swim any faster just because they can do a power clean with 1.5 times body weight. You'll have your own views on that. And those things are so variable. But colleagues, we've been overly obsessed, and that's the human condition, is that we're obsessed by what we can see, what we can feel, what we can hear, what we can measure, what we can observe. You know, that wonderful line in swimming, don't count the laps, make the laps count. We are so obsessed. And since I've been involved in this caper since the 1980s, the most common question is, what volume of training is so-and-so doing? How much volume do they do each week? How many sessions? And it does not matter anywhere near to what you might think it does. It's not what we're writing down that really matters, because I've seen coaches around the world, and I'm lucky with the access that I get. I've seen coaches produce world-class distance swimmers on 50 a week, on 80 a week, on 45 a week. I've seen coaches with 15-week training cycles. I've seen so much variation, and in the end, at the finish line at the Olympics, there's a second between them. It's not what's written, it's what's not written. It's the spaces between the lines. And I think increasingly when I see great coaches And when I see them working with athletes and that responsibility thing we talked about a little bit earlier, I've got to keep letting people in, sorry. When I see that, it becomes increasingly clear that our over obsession with the content of workouts is not really what it's about. And it's those 4 or 5 things that I've spoken about earlier. And the story that I told on Brett Hawkes the other week, I think I'll repeat. Long time ago, I was working for Swimming Australia. I was on deck with John Carew, who's no longer with us, and he was working with Kieran Perkins. And Carew was quite brilliant and I think underestimated as a philosopher and as a coach, even though he had some great results, obviously, with Kieran and some others. But he wrote his workout on the board, and there was that classic sort of Bob Trefine heart rate set, 24 100s on 140 with critical speed. And this is not the conversation to have about training intensity right now. But there was a couple of things that Carew said that day which really hit me, which was this. He said, if I'm so good, where's the rest of them? If I'm so good, where's the rest of them? He said, every kid in this pool, Wayne, is doing this workout. Why have I only got him? Now, if you're a scientist, you'll say, oh, it's genetics. You know, it's heart and lung functionality. It's myoglobin. It's capillarization. Yeah, sure, all those things are important. But then when you watch Perkins do that set, it wasn't that he was doing 24 100s. He was doing 100 perfectly 24 times in succession because that's what he needed to do when he hit the water and he's splitting whatever first hundreds, 54, 55, and then backing off to 58 fives to try and swim a 14:45 or better. So what Perkins chose to do, go back to our first slide, what Perkins chose to do was to grab that set, take ownership of the set. Because I never heard Carew, and the same with any of the athletes and coaches I work with around this choice. He didn't say, I want these to be perfect. I want you to do the same stroke rate, same stroke count, same breathing rhythm, same pacing to within half a second. The athlete chose to do that. And he took ownership of it. And in doing so, understanding the intent behind the content, consistently got the performance improvements. I've just posted a video this morning actually on LinkedIn. Another story on this, guys, is a story I love to do, which is the David Marsh story. So I'd been invited to spend a little bit of time with the US team before the Gold Coast Pan Packs. And David Marsh and I had had a relationship, great mates for a long time. And we were walking up and down and Lochte was in the pool. And I mean, great thrill. There was a lot of their great athletes were there and Lochte was in the pool. And the question I said to Marshy, and it's on this video, again, I posted this morning. The question I said to Marshy was, if you had to choose athletes, but you couldn't do physical elements, couldn't do speed, couldn't do performance at NCAAs, couldn't do high school team, club times, US Opens, nothing. If you had to choose an athlete on one quality, what would it be? Marshy said commitment. I agree. And I said, why commitment? He said, because when an athlete's committed, it takes what it takes. There are no excuses. And I said, well, I agree with you, Marshy, but the problem is I can test for speed. We can look at split times. We can look at performance results. We can do endurance testing and we can coach all those things as well. But what about commitment? And David Marsh said, I've always found that when an athlete is committed, truly committed with my program, when I give them a choice, there's that choice again. When I give them a choice between doing things the easy way and the hard way, in brackets, the right way, they will choose to do things the right way. So we're walking up and down with Lochte at that moment. And Marshy said, he's got the same choice as every kid and every swimmer in the world at this moment. He gets to the flags. Do I breathe inside the flags? Do I turn from one side of the wall to the other? So I'm coming out on an angle. Do I tuck too tight on the wall? Do I breathe inside the flags? And what do I do? And of course, you watch Lochte. And without Marsh doing, saying, blinking anything, Lochte comes to the middle of the pool. So he's turning in a straight line. It's a straight line sport, coaches, as you know. Everything needs to be done, turn, start, dive, turn, finish, straight lines. He comes to the middle of the lane. He turns in a straight line, explodes off the wall. He doesn't breathe first 3, 8 to 10 kicks in 2 to 3 seconds, which seems to get them going. Doesn't breathe first 3, immediately comes to the middle of the lane, all that sort of stuff. Coaches, it's this choice, this power, that choice. brings to an athlete where whatever you write on the board, they take ownership of it and they make it even better. That they're understanding that it's their intent that makes your content actually work. And I see workouts like this all over the world. I just sort of made this up yesterday. You know that it's not what's written there. We could swap 2 times 200. We could make it 3 times pull to 5 times pull. We could do 12 sprints. Coaches, I promise you, it doesn't matter anywhere near to the degree that you think it is. I no longer believe this is really a physiology-driven sport. It's an athlete-driven sport where it's a partnership with athletes and coaches, where athletes choose to be remarkable. And we just throw a lot of physiology in there to make sure they can do what they need to do when and where they need to do it. But the issue with physiology, and as a physiologist myself, is that you can be blinded by the physiology, overly focused and overly obsessed with how much, how hard, how often, and you miss what really matters, which is what's not written. I mean, look at warm-up, classic warm-up. What do kids do in warm-up? Any old bloody thing. But what's the difference between warm-up and racing? It's great technique, excellent skills, great breathing, wonderful rhythm done slowly. That's all it is. And that's not written there. But you can, through your coaching, you can inspire them for them to engage with that and turn that into a wonderful warm-up. So of all the things I can throw at you now, the things that I'm seeing with the different sports that I work with, and certainly with the swimmers and the coaches that I get to work with, we're shifting away from being overly concerned with the minutiae of physiology and spending a lot more time helping the athletes to understand that it's the choices that they make and don't make that ultimately determine the success of them and their swimming career. All right, number 6, know that everybody is different. That time's gone fast. Know that everyone is different, especially when it comes to technique. Tell the Gennady story again. I've told it a lot. A wonderful guy, had huge impact on my thinking, and I think a very underestimated power and force in swimming. But I was walking up and down with Gennady once, and on Pool Deck, I lived in Canberra. I used to go over and spend time with him when I could. And I came back, he said, "Where have you been, Wayne?" I said, "I've come back from Western Australia." And I said, Gennady, it's interesting. They're all doing Popov drills, you know, that side on lateral with the arm control. And, you know, they're all telling me about how Popov swims with a kayak paddle. And they're all telling me, you know, that lateral freestyle with a progression on 1 stroke, 3 stroke, 5 stroke. I said, all that. And I said, "I've never seen you do those." And he said, "Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?" And he said, "I'm not a big believer in drills. I'm a believer in technique." And I said, "Well, that's interesting, Gennady." He said, "Because if you overly emphasize drills, you end up trying to teach many other strokes, but you're trying to make the swimmer fit your stroke model rather than fit your stroke model to the swimmer." And this line, coaches, which should be on our t-shirts, every swimmer is different, every technique is different. And even though there's broad principles of head and hip position and breathing, and you'll have your own philosophies that you believe are unbreakable and the cornerstones of your success, and that's great. But the story from Gennady is that everyone is different, and quite often it's their difference that underpins their greatness, especially I think in this sport, in our sport, when it comes to technique. Every swimmer is different, every technique is different. And one of the things, again, to talk about biomechanics, for example, I think one of the big mistakes we've all made, and if you remember, there's a common theme in this presentation about moving away from the measurable, the accountable, the observable. One of the mistakes we made early, certainly from the 82 version of the McGlee book, the Colwyn book, not so much the second version, the 96 version of the McGlee book, but one of the mistakes we've made is that we've believed that there's a perfect technical model for all athletes, 45-degree hand angle, 90-degree on elbow. I don't believe that's the case, because what's happened is that we've gone to level 1 coaching courses. We've seen those models put forward. We've then gone back to programs and gone, okay, well, every kid needs to look like that or that, whatever it might be. And those of you working with elite athletes know it's not the case, is that you've adapted your thinking on efficiency of technique to meet the specific demands of the individual swimmer. That's really where it is. And I was in, let's just say Europe, because I think one of you is from that country, who shall remain unnamed. But I was in Europe in 2019, and I sat in the back of a level 1 swimming coaching course, and I wasn't sure whether I needed to drink a lot more, bang my head with a brick, or a combination of both, because I sat there while they did ATP CP. They talked about VO2 max and capillarization. They talked about Yerkes-Dodsey's inverted U. They talked about hand pitch differentials and showed pictures of seagulls and went, my God, we're 30 years past that stuff. We shouldn't be teaching that stuff. It just doesn't apply. And no, more importantly, unless we coach coaches to coach, how can they coach? We've spent so much time teaching them about Bernoulli's principle, yet we haven't shown them how to build quality relationships with teenagers. Which is the more important? Who gives a crap about whether or not you've got upper and lower forces working on the wing of an albatross? When the kid says, I hate swimming, that's more important than anything, is that they're falling in love with our sport, so they want to keep coming. And when they get to that relationship rationalization moment, they choose you. Number 7, know to create and innovate equals great. One of the things, again, that I see with great coaches is their ability to try something new. I'll tell a John Mitchell story. John and I didn't get on particularly well, but I still admire the guy tremendously. Yes, you're John Mitchell, the rugby coach. And, you know, John was a forwards coach, but I mean, just worked incredibly hard and was a very tough, committed rugby coach, as so many of them were. But I was doing a bit of work with him in the force many years ago. And John said, you know, it's a shame we can't get an aerial view. So this is 2005, 6. And John said, it's a shame you can't get an aerial view of a scrum. So he thought about it for a while, and he went to the pool shop and he bought an extendable pole that you'd normally use to, you know, clean gutters and scoop up leaves. And then he got a crappy little video and he stuck some tape to it, and he stuck it to the end of this pole, and he stood there holding that. And then with the technology that was available at the time, we then take the video camera, a little Sony Handycam thing, inside, and we'll play it back. And then he thought, you know, it's a shame we can't have a television on the field so we can replay that to the players straight away, live, immediate feedback, and we can make some technical changes. So one of the coaches in the group said, well, when we go away with the family in the caravan, we've got this thing called an inverter that you plug into the car and it'll run a television. So we go and get one of the utes, we put a bit of shade on it, we get a television, we stick it on the back of there, we run the inverter, we plug the little handy cam straight into it, and the players are getting live feedback. Every time I see great coaches, I see some level of innovation, of doing things differently, on daring to be unique and being different because they know they're looking for an edge. Guys, I promise you, the edge you're looking for isn't in here. It isn't in the US. It isn't in the UK. It's in your own mind. And with your phone, everything you've ever wanted is right there. You can get anything, anytime, anywhere for free. There's more than enough there if you know where to look and you're looking outside of swimming. There's a lot of opportunities for creating a level of greatness through innovation. And finally, never stop learning. Never stop learning. As I said at the beginning, I spent an hour with Bill this week, got a lot from that apart from just a great friendship. I spent some time this morning sitting very quietly one-on-one over coffee with one of the Titans coaches around coaching, but we also talked about our lives. That's had a big impact on me. Later on today, I've got to go and talk to a netball coaching friend of mine about team dynamics. That will be learning. It goes back to our great colleague, Forbes Carlisle, who again is no longer with us. I met Forbes for the first time in 1993, and I'd just written a couple of things. And Carlisle came up to me and said, Wayne, I've been dying to meet you. There's so much I need to learn. And at the time, he was one of the great legends of our sport. He'd written a lot of books. He'd done so much. And yet the pace of Forbes's learning was frightening. Every morning out of bed at 4, connecting with people right up until the week that he died. still trying to learn and absorb and listen and grow by his connection with other people. And coaches, increasingly, what I would encourage you to do is look outside of swimming. So connect like these two and talk about coaching and swimming specifically. That's for our sport specific stuff, but find a rugby coach in town. Find a netball coach, a cricket coach, a canoeing coach. Find a coach who's as passionate about the game as you are and learn from them, and then start to expand. One of the final stories I'll throw you is this: is a few years ago I got invited by Rugby Australia to do an innovations workshop. And in the room, we had people like Rod McQueen, former rugby Wallaby coach, Bob Dwyer, former Wallaby coach. We had 5 or 6 former Wallaby coaches there. And of course, what did they do? They talked about what we used to do and what was successful in their time. I'm a big fan of the All Blacks and New Zealand rugby generally. At the same time, we were doing a love-in and looking backwards at what we'd done. Steve Hansen, Smithy, they were in New York, spending time with the New York Ballet, learning about performance under pressure, precision under pressure, and getting people to do what they need to do with a higher level of precision in a public arena. Which one of the two teams do you think is probably or was destined for greater things? The one only looking at themselves, the one only looking at what they'd done, or the one saying, let's see what the best of the world outside of sport completely are doing another part and see whether or not they can help us be better athletes, better coaches. So that's my presentation. I've seen great coaches in many, many sports. The common threads to me are the 8 things that we've gone through, but there's probably 100 more. Of all the things that I've seen in great coaches, generally it's their humanness. Is that it's not their greatness that defines them. It's not being a great coach that defines them as a human being. It's who they are that has turned them into and made them great coaches. The great rugby league coach, Wayne Bennett, has got a great line to finish on, which is this. He says, what you take into coaching is going to be what you take out of it. So the person you are, your values, your beliefs, your philosophies, who you are won't change. Your knowledge will change. Your understanding will change, but who you are as a human being, what you take in will be what defines your coaching. Those qualities that you possess as a human being are the things that will define your greatness as a coach. That's me on the beach, just to rub it in for those of you that live down in Invercargill, Southland, that if you want to stay in contact with me, I assume everybody is a friend until proven otherwise. So that's my email, my phone. You can contact me through a whole bunch of social media. LinkedIn is my favorite at the moment. I have about 50 podcasts, which are free, about 100 videos on YouTube. It's always great to subscribe, but you don't have to. Guys, thank you very much. I've enjoyed that hour. Happy to take some questions, although we're right on the hour, but happy to throw it open to anybody.
Yeah, look, Wayne, holy moly, thank you very much. Some great stuff in there. So we'll open it up to questions, and I'll be quiet and let everyone else have their piece.
This is my small mug.
Hi, Wayne. Thanks very much for that.
Pete, how are you?
I'm good, boy. Very good. Very good. Communication, which you're linking to how you're connecting with your athletes, male, female, teenage connections that you're getting on, experiences with them. How are you finding the interactions that you've had and witnessed that coaches are having differences between male and females?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it's something I was talking with your old mate Bill the other day about. It's a fascinating period of time in coaching. I think there is a lot of fears, maybe too strong a word, but there's a lot of confusion with coaches now about the level of intensity and the level of not even force, the level of directness and the level of honesty that they can deliver with athletes of all ages and all genders. And my case in point is, you know, the way that we were training for so long was huge volumes of non-specific work and pushing athletes to their physical limits. Why? Because we believed that international competition is effectively warfare, because we want our athletes to succeed and we care about them so much that we were pushing them and driving them to levels where they were feeling fatigued and feeling a little distressed physically, because we honestly believed, based on the knowledge and the information and research at the time, that was the way to go. When you hear athletes coming out now after retirement, Peter, and saying, I think that was too much. I think I was doing hard, but doing it saying, but because of what we know now, and in any field of life, in any walk of life, saying what we were doing 30 years ago was probably wrong. That's a dangerous road to go down, because to my mind, no matter how hard we were working at that time, the vast majority of coaches were doing it because they loved their athletes and wanted to see them achieve their goals. And that was just one of the coaching methodologies. Going specifically back to your question, what I'm seeing when I talk to younger coaches is they're trying to figure out how hard can they go in terms of the focus, intensity, and honesty of feedback. And I think some of the stuff we've talked about today, particularly those first 2 or 3 slides, to me, I think it's one way forward for us, is that I think the athletes are still happy to do 70 to 80 Ks a week if they own it, they accept responsibility for it, they feel like it was their decision and their choice, and they understand why they're doing it. But I can case in point from something we're doing this morning that I can't go into great detail, but we're doing a research project with the players this morning in the NRL. And the guy who presented the research, I went up to him and said, mate, that's the best job I've heard a researcher do. Because even though there's a lot of mucking around with it and it breaks our routine, it's a pain in the bum in some ways, he sold it to the players as being in their direct benefit. And their heads were nodding and they went, yes, we can see this. And they went, wow. And so even though it's inconvenient and a little bit of a nuisance, the players went, I'm going to do this because it's going to benefit me. And when I left, they were doing it brilliantly. And I think that's going to be the key for us, Peter, whether it doesn't matter what gender they are, is that Sweetenham example, is we're going to have to stick to the things we believe are right and true and will make a difference, but do it in ways where athletes go, yes, I get it, coach. That's in my interest. I accept ownership for that. It's my responsibility. It's my destiny. I think once we're doing those things, that they'll all buy into it. What I'm hearing increasingly, though, is they certainly don't want the standing at the end of the pool screaming times and splits. They're not seeing that as coaching. And it's interesting, again, I think, when you're working with a lot of different groups and sports, that what I see head coaches do, for example, the best head coaches I see in football, they don't do a lot of delivery of program. They do a lot of one-on-ones, and they pull players out for 30 seconds one-on-one to connect with them, or they'll pull a player out for a minute and do a 2-minute skill block and then put them back in. They work more one-on-one with players. The assistant coaches run the drills. The assistant coaches run the program. The assistant coaches run that. But in terms of the relationship, the real art and connection stuff, the head coaches float around, no pun intended with our sport, but they float and they spend most of their time making sure that, you know, that relationship is really there and the athletes engaged with what they're doing. So hopefully roundabout some of that, I've answered some of your question, but mate, look, in short, it's a very uncertain time. Go back and have a look at, if you haven't looked at it yet online, the independent report in Swimming Australia about some of their findings, and go to the coaching section. There's so much in there that says, you know, it's not a recrimination for what we have done, because I think that's a dangerous path to go down, but it's very much some indication of what I think we need to be doing.
Cheers.
Wayne, Gary Hollywood here, mate.
How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Have you seen more of an impact on young athletes in terms of their anxiety levels? And have you seen that also maybe displayed by their parents?
Yeah, the statistics on mental health, and that's definitely been accelerated by COVID and the lack of access to quality mental health in many countries, mental health care, and the stress and demands on mental health workers. So all those things have shown that the increase in anxiety, depression amongst teenagers has definitely gone up in the last few years. But if you look at the data before that, it was definitely on an incline anyway. To my eye, Gary, again, this is important on the way that we coach, is that the sport is so driven by goals, isn't it? The first time a kid swims, they're there for a week and we go, there's a meet coming up, you need to qualify for it. So there's already, right from the first steps, there's this goal-orientated, future-focused, pressure is on, qualify for the next meet and qualify for the next meet, qualify for nationals, qualify, and on and on and on it goes. It's understandable because that's the way we've always done it. I think to try and alleviate some anxiety, we stay and think, okay, instead of, in the back of our mind, we're going, I need this kid to swim a 29.5 to make club championships or whatever. But in terms of what we deliver, it's not as focused on that direct outcome where everything is on that. I think what we're seeing, netball's a good example. Just had a discussion with Netball Queensland about defining athletes by the level of achievement, because mum and dad will go online and they'll go, check it out. This is my daughter, the rep netballer, the under 14 rep. Now, this is my daughter, the state player. This is my daughter, the emerging diamonds player. And everything is defined by that. And they start to believe that's who I am, not what I do, but that's who I am. And that then, by connecting who they are to what they do, if there's any fragility in the what they do, who they are starts to become uncertain, difficult for them to come to terms with, and it's dangerous, because if they can't do this anymore, Shane Gould's story, if they can't do that anymore, then that has an impact on who they are. You know, anxiety is an interesting one. In general, my psych mates will tell me all the time that depression is about what's happened in the past. Anxiety is fear about what may come in the future, which is why we're all doing mindfulness training now. And mindfulness has become such a key skill in mental health and certainly in coaching, where we're getting athletes to stay in the moment, to live in the moment, to be part of the moment, to think about breathing. Well, I mean, you guys would all be experts on that. You can get that online. But why mindfulness has become such an important tool, because we're seeing so many kids with depression and anxiety, and cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness is one element of that. We're teaching them to just be in the moment, to be the best they can be right here and right now. And the cumulative effect of that on alleviating some anxiety. Now, the other thing too is I think goal setting is the way we've done it's a bit overrated. So setting big national goals or qualifying goals or championship goals will appeal to some people, but for the majority, it's micro goals. And micro goals about today. How can I be the best I can be right here and right now? Because you know the power of that, the cumulative effect of me choosing to be the best that I can be here and now every day, chances are I'm going to get those goals anyway. So I definitely, when you think about anxiety for general mental health and what the mental health practitioners talk about in management of anxiety, which is getting people to live here and now and focused on this moment, I think we can coach that way. And we shift from talking about PBs in the future, national championships, to having swimmers live in the moment in this. And the word I use when I do work with swimming groups is what are you doing on this lap? What are you doing on this turn? What are you doing on this kick set? What are you doing to keep them coming back to the word this, because this is here and now. I can't, if I keep thinking about I'm 3 seconds off for national time, that's one element that may start to introduce some elements of anxiety, particularly if it's overly stressed by mum and dad, and becomes too much of an obsession. Whereas if I'm thinking about this kick set, this pull set, this sprint, this lap, this 200, that immediacy and that micro goal of that moment, that takes a lot of that away. So get him thinking about being the best they can be. Just a quick one on that too, guys, is one of the things I'd encourage you to say to your parents is their social media stuff. If they post those beautiful photos of their kids with a gold medal around their neck, they should be doing the same when the kid doesn't qualify, because the kids start to believe mum and dad love me, which is the most precious thing to them. Mum and dad love me only when I succeed. Mum and dad post and tell people how great I am when I succeed. When I don't succeed, they don't say a damn word. Therefore, if I don't succeed, mum and dad don't love me. So much data around that, so much stuff that if you're talking to parents, encourage them by all means to say, isn't my son or daughter or isn't my child wonderful? Look at what they've done. But when they come 16th, same thing. I'm so proud of them. I love watching them swim. Aren't they remarkable? I'm proud of them every day for who they are. Again, these are things with feedback we get from athletes. When I won, mum and dad were close, bought me stuff, told the world how wonderful I was. When I didn't win, I got nothing, no feedback, thought mum and dad didn't care about me anymore. Well, screw it. I don't need swimming because I don't want to put my heart, not my physiological heart, but my emotional heart. I don't want to risk my heart by failing at swimming. I'm not going to do it anymore. So all these things have started to come out over the last 4 or 5 years from doing some research with retiring athletes.
Gary, just to follow up that point you made on anxiety, one of the silver linings that I think's come out of this is that in our pool, we don't have spectators anymore. There's no parents there. So there's no sideways glances when a swimmer hits the wall and looks around to see if they're being watched and worrying. And without the parents there just seems to be a great atmosphere in the pool now. Those that were anxious are not anxious anymore. And that spreads to some other ones as well, because they're not worried about their mate being anxious. I'm just wondering, has anybody else seen this as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
I was just alluding to the fact that young parents seem to be struggling when I watch them take their kids to school. There's a few miserable looking faces. You can see that in their kids too, even at primary school level. And obviously there's a lot of research now into screens, and the more time they spend on computer screens, the more chance they have of suffering from depression. And so I'm thinking it's obviously a lot of research showing that if the parent's going through depression, that's going to have a massive impact on the child. So I kind of feel it's a bit deeper than just at the sport level. I'm just thinking it's more of a lifestyle thing at the moment, and it's hard to combat it with the child if it's in the household.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's an important point, Gary. That I've had some recent chats with coaches who've gone through some real mental health challenges, relationship breakups, a whole range of issues. That's got to be reflected in their coaching. I mean, we think we can leave it at the door, and that everybody else can't, but we don't. We carry that pain and that difficulty and that stress and emotion, and that's going to come out. You know, I think as human beings, you know, when you're really connecting with someone else, you feel them, you sense their energy. And if you're drained and you're struggling, you're not sleeping, all those things that come with it has to affect your coaching. And then if you've got parents who are struggling with it at the same time, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, look, fascinating area.
I've got a good paper that Dr. Bruce Lowry's just published, Wayne. So if you haven't seen it already, I'll send it to you.
Well, beautiful. I'd love that, mate. Thank you. So, Brendan, maybe one or two more questions, or do you want to wrap up?
Hey, look, I'm happy to hang around and take a couple more questions and listen in. But if you've got places to be, people to see, we can finish it up.
No, we've got about another 10 minutes or so. Then I've got that thing I have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. All right. Sounds good. So any more questions, fire away. If not, we'll finish it up there, guys.
It's Matthew Pickering here. I'm based in Gisborne, involved with water polo and surf lifesaving.
I love Gizzy.
A lot of aspects, thank you. Water's a little bit warmer than Invercargill. I heard you mention that before.
Oh, I like fishing too. I'm still waiting on an opportunity to go kingy fishing there, but
I'll tell the locals to leave one for you. The parental thing is such a huge area, and this means just some great insights there. What else have you tried or seen that works really well with parents?
apart from
as if you need to coach them as well.
Apart from working next to an orphanage or something along those lines, in the early days, I used to do. It was all about how many sessions to do, what to eat. The most common questions I get in parent sessions are, how many sessions a week should a swimmer be doing? The answer is whatever the coach decides. I'm not that dumb. Whatever their goals determine, as many as they recover from, those sort of things, or do they need a special diet? So I used to, that was where I was. But what I've done the last 10 years is around saying to a parent, do you understand your role? So coach, physical training, technique, skill, tapering, program development, culture, environment, that's us. Swimmer, only thing we can ever ask, give us all you can give us today. And if you've come off exams, if you're fatigued, if you just played rugby, give us whatever give me the best that you're capable of giving today. And that's the consistent cumulative effect of that. We'll get where we need to go. Then also to parents, what are your job? Teach values, teach virtues, love, unconditional love, acceptance. Give them the confidence of knowing that they're loved for who they are as a human being, not for what they do. Teach them independence, teach them self-responsibility, teach them to take accountability for the things they do and say and don't say. Inspire them to know that it doesn't matter whether they're first or last, you love them equally the same. So I've gone down that road where it's been about relationships and it's been about the things that only parents can give. Having said that, if you ask what's my success rate of doing parent lectures around the world since 1991 and everywhere, I think 5% of parents actually get it and make changes in effect because of how much we love our kids. They see their kids winning at under 10 and assume that they're on a pathway direct to winning national championships and breaking a world record. And I get that, I really do, but I found the most effective training has been on those things, unconditional love them for first, love them for last. Teach independence, all that stuff. Don't pack their bags, don't unpack their bags. They have to set their own alarm. They've got to clean their own goggles. They have to make their own food for meats. They've got to clean up afterwards, all that stuff, so that they're taking responsibility and accepting the accountability for the things they do and don't do, and so on. The other thing is to have 2 or 3 parents in your club that get that message so that they can then reinforce the messages to other parents. So you have 2 or 3, normally the ones that you've got the best relationship with, and you say, these are the messages I need to get through to parents. So when they're sitting there watching training, or they're not in Pete's program, but when they're sitting watching training or they're in a meet and one of the parents says, my Lucy's going to be the greatest 50 backstroker this 9-year-old this club's ever seen, there's a parent near him says, well, yeah, she does swim backstroke really well, but you know what's really important? You know what I found's been really essential? I think having those group of peer parents, particularly the ones with who's the most influential parent in your club? The parent of the national swimmer, the parent of the kid who just did a PB. So try to find a couple of parents who get your message. The best ones will be the ones of the best swimmers, because they're the ones with credibility. Quite often they've got more credibility with other parents than you do, because the parents assume they're doing something right because their kid's a national kid, and influence them, then they influence the other parents. And one of the things we do in footy now is we spend less time with the players. I spend much more time with the coaches, because I might have the information, but the coaches have the relationship with the players. So if I want a message to get across the player group, instead of me standing there and delivering it to the players, I make sure the coaches have got it, and then the coaches influence the players' behavior because the coaches are the ones with the relationships with the players. I can do some broad stuff, but the stuff that actually changes people, my definition of coaching, it's the art of inspiring change through emotional connection. So if I've got a message to get across, which is around commitment or values, I make sure the coaches get it first. The coaches deliver the information because they've got the relationship. And I've found those two things, talking about what parenting really is, and then creating a parent group to deliver the messages for you, is the best strategy that I've found so far.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Phil.
Yeah, my name's Phil Mahuish. I was involved, and I've spoken to Bill numerous times because Bill was in Wales as a performance director, or performance. He was working with performance, and obviously Bob Trevine as well was working with Dave Haller, with Dave Davis.
Yeah.
So I've been involved, within that, and obviously long-term athlete development was a very big thing, and progressive planning, and right the way through. Obviously, you're saying about working with the athlete now. Do you still feel that that's important? As far as you long-term athlete development and obviously the progression of sets, or are you a bit more open to it to see how the athlete actually feels compared to if you actually do that set, or what would you sort of say around that area?
Yeah, I make more enemies with answering that question than anything, because I really hate LTAD. I hate the concept of the pathway, not because the concept is a good one, the systematic long-term progression of athletes from a physical, mental, emotional, technical, tactical perspective, good model. But the way that it's been implemented around the world hasn't really worked. And the example I'll give you is this, is that quite often it's called the performance pathway. And I was doing some work with Tennis Australia a few years ago, and that was being led by PricewaterhouseCoopers. So they know nothing about sport, but they know a lot about systems and models. And I was a expert, so-called expert witness, contributor, something or other. Anyway, we met, and one of the guys from PricewaterhouseCoopers said, we think the problem with tennis is the pathway. And before I jumped out of my skin and went, I agree, I said, why would you say that? And he said, because the way the pathway is interpreted by parents, coaches, and athletes around the country is that every kid who picks up a tennis racket is going to be Serena Williams or Rafael Nadal. So the underpinning assumption from that moment is the way they train, they eat, everything is around them heading towards being a top 10 ATP player or WF player. Whereas a very, very small number of kids want to do it, have the talent, have the ambition, who want to do it. But the whole system is based around developing them from 5 to being the number 1 player in the world. And the way he described it was beautiful, Phil. He said, it'd be like, I'm seeing if I've got one here, I do. He said, it'd be like telling kindergarten kids who only want to draw pictures of rainbows and horses and unicorns and fairies with crayons, it'd be saying, you've got to hold your pen like that because when you're an orthopedic surgeon one day, that's how you'll have to hold your scalpel. He said, that's basically what's happening, is that even though in principle it should be a good model, the way that it's interpreted around the world, everywhere, is that it's a performance pathway designed to help kids be elite athletes. And it's way off base, because once they get to 14 or 15 and all they've done is, one of the things, and again, this is a big challenge for us, so much of what we've done has been physiology based, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, big volumes, aerobic base, capillarization, got to get a base in them, well, that's great. How many kids do you know are sitting at home doing nothing, who've got great capillaries, wonderful oxygen transport, brilliant heart, lungs, who hate swimming? So the physiology is important, but because we've prioritized it above falling in love with the sport, great relationships, friendship groups, connection with the coach, of course we've prioritized aerobic base and those things at a young age. We've got all these kids with wonderful physiology who hate swimming. Whereas if we go the other way and we say skills, technique, relationship, integrated holistic program of speed, bit of aerobic, bit of this, great qualities and connections between coaches and athletes. They get to 14 or 15 and go, man, I love this sport. Let me at it. So one of the things that I'm suggesting to sports is that up until mid-teens, it's about that. Grow the sport, connect with the sport. Let's get them all to fall in love with this amazing sport. 14, 15, of course, sports science, heart rate sets, underwater filming, drones, all that stuff then, of course. But by prioritizing the physiology first, I think we're and it's not just us. It's definitely rowing, kayaking, gymnastics. The ones that have overly emphasized physiology too early are all seeing the same patterns more or less that we do. And it is a seismic shift in starting the pathway a little bit later. So rugby league, for example, we used to have the performance pathway starting at 5 or 6. We now talk about a thing called critical capture point. Critical capture point, 14, 15 years of age. Netball, critical capture point, 13 years of age. So once you get to those critical capture points, the pathway then goes, great. Biomechanics, physiology, nutrition, so great. But up until then, it's fall in love with the sport so that I'd never want to leave it. And then once we've got them, which is why it's called capture point, critical capture point, I've got them in the sport with the right attitude. They love what they're doing. Bang. Now let's give them a pathway from there.
Does that mean that, obviously I've done a lot of presentations and coming through, and I got to be honest, so Bill has been an influence and a lot of people there. And some of the presentations they've had there, unless you do that aerobic work by the time you're 12 or 13, you never ever catch that back in life. Is that incorrect?
Yeah, no, I don't believe it. And certainly the physiologists that I rely on, which is David Pine, Professor David Pine, and some of the other guys that I work with, no. And that research was all done sort of late 60s, early 70s anyway. So it's time we revisited it. But you know, even if that point was true, that I look at it and say, well, what's a swimmer? Good technique, great attitude, hard work, great values, resilience, persistence. There's no athlete that is only aerobic base.
Yeah.
And if you said, okay, well, let's say the research said that you'll never get an optimal aerobic base unless you're developed by that peripubertal moment. Well, it's great. I'll spend more time on technique, more time on skills, more time on mental skills, better on diet, better on recovery. You know, we can come at it from another way to find that edge we're looking for. But when we've really just said, you got to get the miles, while that's been our absolute focus and obsession, and the bigger issue is kids not doing the sport. Now, there's a great line I like, Phil, which is the only kid who doesn't get better is the one who's not there. And given a choice of doing huge volumes of work or having them keep coming, I'll choose keep coming, because we can progressively do more work over time. We can find other ways. But while it's work above all things, if they're not coming, they don't get better. So that's really the focus. How do we get them to keep coming? They'll come if they love it. Why do they love it? Because we've given them that opportunity. All right. That's all I've got.
No, Wayne, thank you very much again. There was plenty of stuff that I took away, 1.5 pages worth of notes, and I was trying to write very small and scribble it down very fast. So hopefully I can go back and read my writing.
Yeah, well, if you took a page and a half of notes from me, you probably need to get out more and have a more expansive life.
No dramas.
All right, guys, look, stay well. And I'm glad nobody did a wallaby joke. We've survived an hour and a half without that. And we don't need any help.
Yeah.
But guys, look, stay well. Please stay safe. Thank you again for InScout for allowing me the opportunity. Thank you for Brandon for inspiring me to do it. Thank you for Henrietta for organising things. And guys, you know how to contact me if I can do anything for you anytime. Please just ask.
Yeah, thanks very much, Wayne. Very appreciative.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Wayne.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Have a great day, guys. See ya.
Bye-bye.
All righty.
I'm still there. And Gary, oh, hang on.
Just need to hit that finish record.